We saw that the Babylon system would incorporate every foul spirit, would be go along with the world. But then when we look at verse number 3, it says, "For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth," in other words, political leaders, "have committed fornication with her." And then it says, "And the merchants of the earth." The merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. So here we see that the wealthier nations, this is the direction things are going. And so the economic leaders of the world are aligned with this system. And so if we're seeing that the wealthier the nation is, the more it's aligned with Sodom and Gomorrah, well, it makes sense then that when we look at this passage, that the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. Of course, the end time system must compromise with the way that the world is going, because as we saw, Satan is converted after the modern order. When we looked at that passage in Great Controversy 588. Revelation 13, then 16 and 17 tells us he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So wealth plays a key role. Wealth will play a role in the final conflict, and those in control of wealth will be aligned with the worldly form of godliness system. So this is a global, centralized economic system, right? If you can control all over the world who can buy and sell, is that a capitalist, nationalistic system or a globalist, centralized economic system?
Oh, this is globalism at its finest. Yeah,
Clearly.
you can even say it's a form of socialism as well.
That's right. And we'll continue to build on that, because you know that before Protestantism spread, now I'm speaking about how generally, historically, people will speak about Protestantism. When you look at Martin Luther and you consider the spread of Protestantism, governments changed, particularly with the spread of Calvinism. Governments changed. Prior to that, what were the governments in Europe? They're pretty much monarchies, and all that mattered was the opinion of the ruling class, the kings, and the clergy, the papal clergy. Right? That's the only opinion that mattered, and it was basically a feudalist system. But with the spread of Protestantism came nationalism. In other words, the nations could look to their own interests. They didn't have to submit to the centralized authority of Rome any longer. With the spread of Protestantism, you have nationalism in that sense, and you also have capitalism. As I said, prior to that, you had feudalism and pretty much monarchies, and the common man's opinion didn't matter at all. But now you have, with Protestantism, you have the rights of conscience become important.
Wow, this is huge. I see what you're doing. This is powerful.
I mean, that makes sense historically, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It also shows that I think a lot of us are interpreting the prophecies wrong.
Well, my point, I'm not a prophet, but I've always thought about these things and wondered, why aren't these things considered? Why aren't these things considered when looking at the end time scenario? Because there's a lot here, isn't it? I mean, what I'm presenting here, it's not a little bit, right? It's not just something taken out of context.
Yeah, correct.
So here we see, again, Americans are increasingly accepting of homosexuality in society. And I would say that when we look at prophecy, when we look at Jesus's words in Luke 17, 26 to 30, when we see that the end time world will be like the days of Lot, like the days of Noah, this is not going to change with the Trump administration. Okay, Trump is one man. This is one administration, but the Bible is clear of what the end time world is going to be like. So this direction is not going to change. I mean, I trust the Bible more than I trust the commentaries of political pundits and of people. We got to go with what the Bible says. Here we see, again, this is, again, I believe Pew Research. This is Pew Research. And that's pretty much what I've been looking at. I think I used Gallup poll before. But here we see 22 of 34 countries surveyed. Younger adults are significantly more likely than their older counterparts to say homosexuality should be accepted by society. So the younger the generation, the more open. So again, we see the direction that things are going. And why is it going that way? The influence of the media, the movies, popular culture. Young people are bombarded with these type of ideas in the school system and so forth. I won't say where or I won't say when, but not too long ago, I was trying to get involved with prison ministry and the kinds you have to do testing in order to minister to prisoners in the prison, doing ministry. There's a lot of people in prison. And so I've been involved with that. But the training that's involved, you got to do significant training to be able to do that. And guess what the training involves? What do you think? Well, it deals with it being inclusive, getting getting the pronouns right, all of that stuff.
Wow.
So this is the direction things are going, and it's really becoming difficult. If you're a Christian and you believe in the Bible, it can really become very difficult to even do prison ministry, sadly, because of these types of things. Here again, we see people who see religion as less important in their lives are more accepting of homosexuality. Now, we consider that form of godliness. It's not true godliness. It's basically going along with the world, compromising with the world, having a form of godliness. And so when we see that, that's basically what Satan is going to give the people. You can call yourself a Christian. You can call yourself whatever you want, as long as you don't actually follow Jesus. Here we see France, talking about revolutionary France in the Great Controversy. France presented also the characteristics which especially distinguished Sodom. During the revolution, there was manifest a state of moral debasement and corruption similar to that which brought destruction upon the cities of the plain. And the historian presents together the atheism and the licentiousness of France, as given in Prophecy. Now this is important, immediately connected with these laws affecting religion was that which reduced the union of marriage, the most sacred engagement which human beings can form, and the permanence of which leads most strongly to the consolidation of society, to the state of a mere civil contract of a transitory character, which any two persons, could be two men, two women, anything, might engage in and cast loose at pleasure. So during the time of the French Revolution, according to Great Controversy 270, marriage was redefined. And according to this, it's saying that it's the most sacred, in other words, talking about marriage, the most sacred engagement that which human beings can form, the permanence of which, in other words, the permanence of marriage, if you have the right view of marriage, society holds to the correct view of marriage, and you have strong marriages and strong families, it's going to lead most strongly to the consolidation of society. But here we see that marriage was redefined, and that's detrimental to society. So now people will look at this, what happened during the French Revolution, and with the French Revolution, they'll say, well, that was what brought down the beast. They say, well, this was the king of the South, so to speak, atheistic systems, and the king of the North, the papacy, received its deadly wound because the French Revolution started 1789, and that was the beginning of the end for the papacy, which received its deadly wound in 1798 with the rise of the Napoleonic dynasty. But they'll look at that and they say, well, that's an atheistic system. That's the king of the South. The papacy is the king of the North, and they were wounded by the king of the South. But what did I say before? How does the papacy conquer? How does the devil conquer? How does the papacy conquer? Do you remember?
Through compromisation.
Through compromise, right. When we look at the image of the beast in Revelation 13, the beast of the sea. Isn't it an amalgamation? We see the mouth of a lion. We see the body of a leopard, right? We see the feet of the bear. we're reminded of the amalgamation of these kingdoms because the papacy takes and uses whatever it can. So if these principles of the French Revolution worked toward its demise, wouldn't it make sense that the papacy would somehow be able to compromise and use what it can in order to regain dominion?
Correct. Makes sense.
So here we see the marriage vow would no longer stand as a sacred bulwark to protect the family. Again, we see Great Controversy 585, the attack of marriage. And then we see it's a pattern, not just with Sodom and Gomorrah and Noah's world. Romans chapter 1 shows us that this is a pattern, that what happened with Sodom and Gomorrah, what happened in Noah's world, this is a pattern that has repeated itself over and over. And here we see specifically, for this reason, God gave them up to vile passions. For even their women exchanged the natural use for that which is against nature. Likewise, men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned with their lust for one another, men with men, committing what is shameful and receiving themselves the penalty for their error, which was due. So we're dealing with homosexuality here in particular. And it is right after mentioning the worship of the creature over the creator. From verse 23 to 25, we see the worship of the creature, the exchange of truth for the lie, the worshiping of the creature rather than the creator. So as a result of this sort of pagan worship, the worship of nature and the worship of things other than God, the result of that is immorality. And so we see when we go back in the past, and in the southern kingdom, that's what we're dealing with in this context, Judah, the southern kingdom of Judah, but it also obviously happened with the northern kingdom. When they compromised with those surrounding nations, what happened? Here we see, dealing with Josiah's reform, because Josiah tried to reform things. It says, then he tore down the ritual booths of perverted persons that were in the house of the Lord, where the women wove hangings for the wooden image. So there was the worship of the image, there was worship of idols, abominations, but we also see perverted persons. And according to the note down there, it says those practicing sodomy and prostitution. So basically, the perversion of Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding nations entered into Judah and even into the house of the Lord. Now, in our day, you may see churches that are said to be safe spaces, or said to be, inclusive churches. What did you say? Affirming churches. Don't we see that in our world today?
Oh yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, and we talked about that. You may see churches hanging rainbows, and the rainbows aren't signifying the covenant of God. So here we're seeing this is a pattern. It's happened all the way back then. Perverted persons, in other words, the accepting of perversion. Even Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 1, 9, and 10, we look over there, he referred to Judah as Sodom and Gomorrah. Hear the word of the Lord, you rulers of Sodom. Give ear to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. So he's talking to his own people, because that's what they had become. That's what they had become. And when we consider Jerusalem's adultery, spiritual adultery against God, they became worse than Sodom and Gomorrah, as we see in verse 47 of Ezekiel number 16. Ezekiel chapter 16, verse number 47 says, you did not walk in their ways, nor act according to their abominations, but as if that were too little, you became more corrupt. So they became more corrupt than them. And again, when we look at Leviticus 18, 22 to 24, we see that this was what the surrounding nations were doing. So those Canaanite nations and Amorites and Perizzites and Jebusites and whatever, all of those indigenous peoples that were cast out before Israel, these were the things they were doing. We see in verse 22 the reference to homosexuality. We even see bestiality referred to in verse 23. And in verse 24 says, do not defile yourselves with any of these things, for by these the nations are defiled. In other words, those Canaanite nations and those pagan nations, they were all doing these things because the worship of the creature of the creator leads to all of these perversions. And so now when we look in the Great Controversy 583, it says, thousands deify nature while they deny the God of nature. Though in a different form, idolatry exists in the Christian world today. She's not saying in the pagan world today. She's not saying in the deist world today or in the Muslim world today or in the atheist. She's saying in the Christian world today, as verily as it existed among ancient Israel in the days of Elijah. The God of many professedly wise men, of philosophers, of poets, politicians, journalists, the God of polished, fashionable circles, of many colleges and universities, even of some theological institutions. And she's talking about in her time, how much more in our time, is little better than Baal, the sun god of Phoenicia.
Wow. Spot on.
So obviously these things have metastasized since her days, because these things were even happening in her days. So I'm not sure how much time do we have, brother, because I don't want to.
Oh, you're good. You're good. How much? I mean, how much longer is your presentation?
This thing goes on a long time.
No, you're good. We can go for another 30 minutes.
Okay, so we'll go for another 30. And like I said, if you want me to come back or whatever, let me know.
Sure, we can come back next week to do part 2 if you're willing.
Okay, that sounds good. This is the key right here. This one, Patriarchs and Prophets, 688. The teaching of the demon gods in ancient times fostered the vilest license. So she's talking about the pagan worship. Basically, the pagan worship was basically the worship of demon gods. And so she's saying the teaching of the demon gods in ancient times fostered the vilest license. In other words, licentiousness, immorality, as we saw in Leviticus 18. It says the divine precepts condemning sin and enforcing righteousness were set aside, truth was lightly regarded, and impurity was not only permitted but enjoined, kind of like we see at the end of Romans chapter 1. And then it says spiritualism. Spiritualism declares that there is no death, no sin, no judgment. Don't we live in a world where people say there's no judgment? Don't they say that in the world we live in today?
Oh, yeah.
And she's saying that about spiritualism. No judgment, no retribution, that men are unfallen demigods, that desire is the highest law. We live in a world where people define themselves by their desires. You are what you feel. And that's the world that we live in. That's why there's so much confusion. That's why when you look up how many genders are there, from spiritualism. She said that's spiritualism declares these things. And desire is the highest law, that man is accountable only to himself. The barriers that God has erected to guard truth, purity, and reverence are broken down, and many are thus emboldened in sin. Does not such teaching suggest an origin similar to that of demon worship? In other words, that same spirit that was at work within paganism, that spiritualism of paganism is the very same thing of spiritualism. Basically it's paganism. Paganism, spiritualism, one and the same, and they lead to immorality and wickedness. And didn't she say that spiritualism was a key ingredient to the end time persecuting system?
Of course. And she said it lays foundation for all the other deceptions.
Yeah, so clearly, again, if spiritualism leads to lawlessness and immorality and Sodom and Gomorrah, which it has repeatedly over and over throughout history, then clearly the end time system is going to embrace that, has to embrace it. And then we see over here. Now, this is from a Catholic source. This is a Jesuit author, James Martin. And he's talking about the recent synod on synodality that happened recently in the Catholic Church from 2021, just finished this year, as far as I know. Well, in a sense, it finished, but certain things are continually going on. This was such a vital movement within the Catholic Church. And so James Martin, who's a Jesuit here, and he's an ally of Pope Francis, is speaking. Now, that first paragraph is my own commentary based on this, and it says, even though in the end, as of now, the Catholic Church didn't make a major apparent change that the world may notice outright concerning this issue, we did clearly see that Pope Francis and leaders he has appointed, like James Martin, are working toward that end in a way like never before. Though the synod completed, it didn't leave the LGBTQ matter undone, But as we read, synodality, controversial issues are here to stay. And so these are some takeaways from the synod's final document by this Jesuit, James Martin. At the beginning of the synodal process back in 2021, there were high hopes among many people that the synod would solve or even adjudicate on some controversial issues, including the ordaining of married men to the priesthood, the ordination of women to the deaconate, and LGBTQ issues. For the most part, these issues were handed over to 10 study groups for further discernment. Okay, so things are continuing. That's why I said down there, therefore, a door has been opened and things aren't being left alone. The Pope's advancement in this area cannot be disregarded. So these study groups are continuing work in these areas in terms of these LGBTQ issues. And we continue to read from the same source. As for LGBTQ issues, there was considerably greater openness to the topic this year in 2024, and ease of discussion overall for several reasons, mainly because the topic was assigned to a study group. There was less need for delegates to, in a sense, debate the issue. So it was removed from debate and put into these study groups. But overall, I feel the attitude, James Martin is saying, the attitude has shifted markedly among most delegates, and for the better. In the document, the term LGBTQ is not used. Not surprising, since it is still an anathema for some delegates, but we ask the church to listen to those who experience the pain of feeling excluded or judged because of their marital status, identity, or sexuality. Still, it is quite a feat that 350 delegates from around the world would agree on this kind of language. The inclusion of the term identity was a pleasant surprise for me. So this Jesuit is for advancing that agenda. And so he's a progressive thinker, so to speak. And so he's pleased with this. He's pleased with the way things went. The final document is sure to delight some, disappoint others, and perhaps even anger some people. So this is a Jesuit. Now, that's important to consider that this is a Jesuit speaker. And it says, therefore, this Jesuit author, James Martin, an ally of Francis, feels that the attitudes have shifted for the better. And as mentioned earlier, he is one of, this is another document that I mentioned this earlier, that I don't have it here in this presentation, but he is one of Francis's hand-picked delegates and is a U.S.-based Jesuit priest who is one of the most prominent advocates of greater LGBTQ inclusion in the church. So this is talking about a Jesuit, and he is obviously very important for this movement within the church, and he's pleased with the direction things are going. So somebody might say, well, the synod on synodality didn't make a decisive point when it comes to that, but obviously Pope Francis has done more than any other pope to advance that issue, and he's elected key leaders to help advance that issue. Another one is this Jesuit named Jean-Claude Haleric, 64-year-old Archbishop of Luxembourg, and he is one of the leading organizers of the ongoing synod on synodality. Well, it's not ongoing now. This is in the past. And the Jesuit was recently added to Pope Francis's Council of Cardinal Advisors. So he's picking these people. And regarding Cardinal Haleric, since his appointment as Relator General of the Synod on Synodality, he has not been shy about pronouncing that he considers the Church's teaching on homosexuality to be outdated and wrong. So when the bishop, so here we can clearly see these are people who are Jesuits. Now, when we think of Jesuits, now you quoted somebody not long ago. Was it Ganun Diop, was it, that was saying the Catholic Church had changed? Was
Correct.
that who you were mentioning there?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, some people may look at the Catholic Church and they say, well, it's changed. Some people may look at it that way. And we may say, well, the Jesuits must have changed as well. They might even say that. But the prophecies are very clear. I mean, the prophecies are clear that the beast will regain dominion, and the Jesuits are foremost. Obviously, these are the elite, aren't they? The Jesuits of the Catholic Church.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So So I think when we consider, well, have they changed? Well, what did we say before? That the papacy conquers through what?
Compromise.
Compromise, compromise. So somebody might look at this guy and say, and here we have a quote from Pope Francis, and he says here, um, November 13th, 2024, from Vatican News. Again, these are Catholic sources. These are Catholic sources. It says, righteous are those who do justice. Righteous, knowing that when resorting to law, we give the poor what is essential. We do not give them our belongings, nor those of third parties, but we give them back what is theirs. We give them back what is theirs. We have lost this idea so many times to return what belongs to them. Let's build the new social justice, admitting that the Christian translation has never recognized as absolute and untouchable the right to private property. In other words, private property is not absolute and untouchable. That's what he's saying. Christian translation has never recognized as absolute and untouchable the right to private property, and has always emphasized the social function of all its forms. The right of ownership is a secondary natural right deriving from the right that everyone has, born from the universal destination of the created goods. So
Wow.
you can see there is no social justice that can be based on iniquity, which presupposes the concentration of wealth. So here we have a
So
very progressive.
you can understand why this view will align more with the Great Reset concept. You own
Yeah,
nothing and be happy, right?
that's right.
So that's a globalist movement in itself.
That's right. That's right. So we can see now this is again a Jesuit, right? The Pope is a Jesuit.
Yes. Hmm.
So here we see these Jesuits. Why are there such progressive views among the Jesuits? Why would there be so much progressive concept among the Jesuits? Again, from a Catholic source.